Hey, everybody, welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast here on a Monday. Dan Labbe with Mary Kay Cabot, a Hey Mary Kay edition of the podcast on the eve of minicamp. It's about 3 o'clock as we're recording this. And of course, a lot of people want to talk about Nick Chubb because we found out Sunday that Nick Chubb going to visit the Houston Texans, likely going to sign there. By the time you hear this, he probably will have signed there. So Mary Kay, our football insider subscribers, cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page to get involved in that. Want to talk a little bit about Nick Chubb. So there were a couple of questions just sort of along these lines. So we'll start here with Jeff Sapizi in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and then I'll throw in a question from Kevin in Loveland, Colorado as well. So Jeff says, hey, Mary Kay, with Nick Chubb moving on, where would you rank him among all-time Browns running backs? And then Kevin wants to know, where does he rank in terms of the Browns post-rebirth? So a couple of rankings questions with Nick's. I was thinking this, is he the second best running back the Browns have had?
Well, he could be. I mean, a case could be made, but they also had Leroy Kelly, who was a Hall of Famer. So I would put him for sure I would put him in the top four. But you've got some Hall of Famers, obviously, Jim Brown, Leroy Kelly, and yeah, so he can't jump up, I wouldn't think, against those guys, ahead of those guys, because he probably didn't necessarily have a Hall of Fame career here yet because of the injuries. So, yeah, I would put him in the top four, but I would have to put him after, I would say, the Hall of Famers.
And it's interesting. He was on that trajectory, right? Like after every game, we'd get the emails from the game notes, and it would be Nick Chubb has passed this Hall of Famer, and he's second only to Jim Brown in this category, and all of that. It just speaks to kind of where his career was going before the injury. But as far as since they've come back, obviously you've got Joe Thomas, you've got Myles Garrett, but again, Nick Chubb has to be on that short list of best players the Browns have had since they returned in '99.
Oh, absolutely 100%. And that is why this is so hard for Browns fans to take, that he's not going to have an opportunity to finish his career with the Cleveland Browns. Absolute fan favorite. I think he embodied the spirit of everything that is right about a Cleveland Browns football player, just in terms of that lunch pail work ethic, that blue collar work ethic. Put your head down, go to work, run through a brick wall. Not a whole lot of fanfare, not a lot of celebrating in the end zone and all those kinds of things. I mean, Nick was just a meat and potatoes kind of guy. He was a hero here, and he was sort of the face of, or at least one of the faces of the franchise as they went through all of those lean years and tough years. He was someone that you could count on. And I understand this is a really tough time. You and I were talking about this a little bit before we turned on the pod. And that is the fact that fans are almost reacting again like it hurts all over again, knowing that he is not going to be back here. So I think people were holding out hope that maybe somehow, some way, he was still going to be a Cleveland Brown this year and still finish his career here. And who knows, he might still finish his career here one way or the other. But for right now, it looks like he's going to at least have an interruption in his Browns career.
And there was someone who suggested that, when all is said and done, Nick Chubb should come back and at the very least retire as a Cleveland Brown. We'll at least get to have one of those press conferences with them where they sign those one-day contracts and retire as a Cleveland Brown. Now, just from a football standpoint, when we think about this, obviously the Browns gave Nick a chance to come back, get back on the field with them. They reworked that contract last year so they could do that. This was always sort of in the cards. Then when they drafted two running backs, it kind of became like, I just don't think there's necessarily a role for Nick Chubb other than maybe just being a mentor, which is important, but Nick wants to be on the field and he wants to play. If Nick goes to Houston and let's say he looks more like Nick Chubb than he did last year, it's like, is that okay? I know Browns fans would be upset about that. But as long as the two rookie running backs do what they're supposed to do, as long as Quinshon Judkins is a featured back and is kind of that bell cow back they envision him as being, Is there a scenario where Nick can go to Houston, look a little bit like the old Nick Chubb, and people just won't be super angry at this front office for letting him walk?
Yeah, I think there's a world in which that can happen if, especially if Quinshon lives up to his billing and his draft status and all of that. I definitely think that fans will get behind him and get excited about him because he has some elements of Nick Chubb in terms of the power, the explosiveness, just built like a rock. He absolutely 100% is so powerful and strong and squatting 600 pounds like Nick Chubb did. And I think that fans will see elements of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt when they see Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson out there. It should be a great 1-2 punch. They're going to be working behind a really good offensive line. And I think on some level, Browns fans probably understand that this is a business. And really, what they didn't want to happen was for Nick Chubb to be sitting around without a role and without anything to do as their fourth string quarterback. They much preferred that he find a job elsewhere where he can get on the field. And that probably wasn't going to happen here.
And this is probably a good scenario for Nick too, just because he's joining another really good back in Joe Mixon. They have a really good quarterback in CJ Stroud, who I guess weirdly isn't throwing right now at OTAs. There's some mystery around that, I guess. But, really good situation in Houston, maybe a chance to make the playoffs in a pretty bad division and, do some stuff that he never really got to do here in Cleveland. So this could certainly be a best case scenario for Nick to come back. And like I said, I hope he does start to look like the Nick Chubb that we saw for a while. I thought there was maybe some glimmers of it before he broke his foot at the end of last season. Maybe he was starting to turn that corner a little bit, but hopefully this can work out for everyone. Nick goes to Houston and starts to look like Nick Chubb and finishes his career strong there. And then here, Browns fans get Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson as kind of that two-headed running back monster for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, a win-win would be ideal. And I, for one, and I know a lot of Browns fans feel this way as well, would be very happy if Nick Chubb can make the playoffs again and be a big part of the reason why the Texans do make the playoffs, and that this has a happy ending for him, because Browns fans love him so much. They don't want to see him not succeed. They don't want to see him not have another chance to go to the playoffs, maybe even go deep into the playoffs. So let's hope it works out really nicely for Nick Chubb and that he gets a number of carries, that he pairs well with Joe Mixon. That's a football team that won the AFC South last year. And, they have a chance to do it again. So, let's see how it goes for them. But this should be a good opportunity for Nick.
Well, and here's the really good news for Browns fans. They're going to at least get to root for Nick Chubb in two games in particular, because they'll play Jacksonville twice. And obviously, Browns fans want to see Jacksonville lose as many games as possible. So if nothing else, even if Browns fans are angry at this football team, they're going to get to root for Nick Chubb a couple of times when the Texans play the Jaguars twice in those AFC South matchups.
Right. And that's, of course, because the Browns, they want a draft pick as high as they can get out of the Jaguars, their first round pick in this upcoming draft, which they may end up parlaying into another quarterback. They might package their first 2 first round picks and trade up or something like that to get a quarterback. So it could turn out to be quite the trade if they end up with their franchise quarterback out of it, that Jaguars blockbuster trade that they executed on draft day this year. Definitely a chance to root for Nick in those games.
Okay, let's move on to another topic, and we'll get to the quarterback battle that we'll be watching at minicamp here in a little bit. But let's go to this topic here, because you wrote something about this, and I think it's interesting. It's something that we've talked about. I've discussed it with Lance Reisland on various pods too, and this comes from Steve Buzin in Alexandria, Virginia. Hey, Mary Kay, will the tougher Browns training camp include a new approach for reducing pre-snap penalties? And just beyond that, I want to kind of discuss this this sort of sea change that the Browns are undertaking when it comes to training camp, and we've seen it a little bit in minicamp even, and they've remade their training staff and their nutrition staff, and they've really made some kind of under the radar changes in a lot of ways that indicate this year is going to look different. As you're seeing all of this unfold and maybe a switch to a more physical, more competitive training camp, what do you think?
Well, I think it's very, very significant. They have had so many injuries over the last couple of years and key injuries. And last year, I looked up as many statistics as I could find on it. And the best I could gather was that they were probably somewhere in the top six in the NFL in man games lost to injury. It was about 248 man games lost to injury. We know some of those were pretty key injuries like Deshaun Watson, their starting quarterback, and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, a lot of guys, key players on this football team. So they've changed things up. Their head trainer, Joe Sheehan, had been with this football team for 16 seasons. They parted ways with him. They completely upgraded their health and performance staff, their nutrition staff, and they have a new philosophy. And Kevin Stefanski's mantra is toughness this year. So while we've been out there at rookie mini camp, which I was surprised right at the outset that rookie mini camp was as fast paced as it was, and that they were doing as many drills in rookie mini camp as they did. It's continued on through OTAs, and I know that's what we're going to see at mini camp and training camp, and that is a lot of drills, a lot of intensity, no contact because they're not in pads or anything like that yet, but just way more than we've seen before. Camp Kevin was always a little cushy, and it's not like that anymore. And I think the analytics staff probably had a lot to do with trying to keep guys from getting hurt, and that will still be a key component of this, but they've ratcheted it up, and this is different than anything that we've seen before.
Yeah, and I mean, like, there's certain injuries you just have to live with, right? Like, I mean, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah tackles Derrick Henry and hurts his neck. There's not a lot you can do about that. Even the Watson Achilles, probably not a ton you could do there. ACLs, but some of the other nagging things or some of the other, strains and things like that, you can certainly prevent little injuries like that. And I also think sometimes they were, I don't know, maybe they were a little scared of that. They were almost too scared of that stuff. Like, you got to get guys ready to play football, and you've got to get them ready to play football in September. And this just kind of goes hand in hand with what I think the transition in this roster represents too. I mean, over the years we've come in and it feels like 20 of 22 jobs are basically settled. And I don't think that's the case this year. I think there's a lot of room for competition. Like DeJuan Jones is probably going to be your starting left tackle. I'd like to see him have to earn it a little bit, though, too. Let's compete a little bit. Let's have Said Tillman compete a little bit at wide receiver, too. Let's have these two rookie running backs compete. And if Dylan Sampson's the better guy, maybe he should get to start the year as the number one back, whatever that looks like. I'm happy to see more competition and happy to see a little bit of a tougher training camp to sort of get these guys ready to play football right away, because if they're going to win games this year, it's going to be because they are a more physical football team. And you can catch some teams off guard early in the season if you're a physical, kind of tough football team.
Right. And I think there were two assistant coaches last year who helped drive the bus on this a little bit. And that was senior consultant Mike Vrabel. Spent a year with this football team. He instilled toughness every single time he was out there in a rep with any position group. He was instilling and driving home that point about toughness, tough, hard-nosed football. And who else did it? Same thing, Bubba Ventrone. Bubba even came out after the first game, the loss to Dallas, and said, we did not play hard enough. We did not play with enough effort. And I know those two guys who played together or worked together, actually played together in New England under Bill Belichick. I know that they felt that this team needed to get tougher. I know that they both felt like that. So lo and behold, that is part of the agenda this year. And I don't think that we can overemphasize it. I think it is a big, huge deal. And now we're going to have to see, how does it translate over to the football field? Everything's different. The nutritionist is different. They're getting different smoothies. I mean, everything is completely different for these guys in the weight room, just in their conditioning and everything. So let's see how it translates into injuries. Are there fewer injuries because of this? Are there more because of this? And then how then does that translate over into victories? Because that is obviously the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and I think just over the years there have been times when this team just hasn't been the tougher team at times. I think back to the Chargers game last year, and Jim and it's easy to say this stuff after games, right? But Jim Harbaugh after the game was talking about, they wanted. I think I saw the locker room video. They thought they could come in and be the tougher team, and I think New Orleans felt that way a few years ago when they came in that minus 20 to whatever the weather was in that game, and they came in and they beat the Browns in that game. I think they felt like they were the tougher team that day. And so again, I think when you look at the talent level on this team and you look at those early season games, you're going to have to have a level of toughness just to survive in those games. But if you come out week one and you punch Cincinnati in the mouth a little bit, kind of a new look defense, a new defensive coordinator, can you kind of stagger them enough to steal a win there? So, sometimes just being a really tough, hard-nosed football team that just plays a certain way, when you're a team that maybe lacks in the talent department, sometimes that can win you some football games that you have no business winning.
That's exactly right. And the other component to that, in my mind, is the fact that the Cleveland Browns play in the gritty, tough, smash mouth AFC North. These are tough football teams. These are tough cities. These are, in some cases, some blue collar cities. And you have to play a certain kind of way. You are going to be freezing out there playing football, sometimes in November, but certainly in December. And you're going to have to be able to run the ball. You're going to have to be tough in the trenches. Joel Bitonio talked a lot about that. And I thought that was interesting, that he just said, we've got to really toughen up in the trenches. And when you look at it, it's borne out by the statistics too. The Browns were 29th in rushing. And I can't remember if it's 20 something against the run. So that's not where you want to be when you are the Cleveland Browns in the AFC North. You want to be able to run the ball, and you want to be able to ram it down the opponent's mouth, especially in December in those late games. So you need to be tough in the AFC North. You need to be tough in Cleveland. This is not a finesse football team. It's not an indoor football team yet. This is still, snow and rain and ice and wind and hail, which I know you love, Dan. You love all those things. I know you
do.
love
I'm a sucker for that. I'm going to be sad when this is an indoor football team in however many years.
Yeah, it's going to be different, that's for sure. But for right now, they need to be battle tested, and you don't want to get to the postseason or even the last 3 or 4 games of the season, and you're not tough enough to handle what comes at you in those playoff intensity style games. They found out the hard way when they got into the wild card game in 2023, and they did get punched in the mouth. They got punched in the mouth in that game. And so you just don't want that to happen again. You want to be ready for what's going to come once again in that final stretch, which is tough in this season. And you want to be ready for the playoffs if you make them.
All right, let's shift gears to quarterbacks, because of course we will be out at mandatory minicamp starting on Tuesday. So 3 straight days we're going to get to watch some of these practices, which is, as we've mentioned, have been a little more competitive, have been, even without pads, have been a little more physical and taxing. So it's still not going to be quite real football, but it is going to be fun to get an idea of this stuff. So let's go to this question from Mike Parker in Chester, Maryland, and it has to do with Shedeur Sanders, sort of how he was viewed in the draft process and on the inside and outside. So a little bit of a long one here from Mike, but he says, "Hey, Mary Kay, I'm confused by the sports writers' analysis and sometimes contradictory statements about Shedeur Sanders. Several people have said that he was a first-round talent, but he was a fifth round draft choice and won't receive the training camp reps of a first round pick. If the Browns thought he was a first round talent but didn't select him early in the draft because of the baggage associated with him, would they now give him the same opportunity that a first round pick would be afforded?
Well, I'll tell you what, that is a great question, Mike. It really is. It's a great question because it is all very confusing, starting all the way back at the draft when Shedeur Sanders, who at one point was expected to possibly be the number 2 overall pick to the Cleveland Browns, tumbled precipitously all the way to the 5th round at 144. It is confusing. But here's what I think happened. I think that Shedeur probably was maybe a little overrated by a lot of the draft prognosticators and members of the media. The media saw him in a different light than the talent evaluators did. So I don't think it was just the baggage and the famous dad and all of the other things that come along with Shedeur, because teams can handle that stuff. These guys are stars, especially now with NIL. These guys are coming in here. They're already millionaires. They're already driving the most expensive cars money can buy. They're already coming in with flash and razzle dazzle. So I don't think that's it. I think that the NFL world probably just didn't have him rated as highly as the outside world did. And that's unfortunate because it makes it seem like he just didn't live up to draft expectations and whatnot. But, it just might be that, that he wasn't everything that some of the experts believed that he was. And when the teams dug in there, they saw some things that they were going to have to work on and work with. And some teams just, they did not want to go that route. And I've said this a number of times. I think the teams that did not put the work on him, I think that those teams shied away from him because they figured, well, we're not going to take him if the teams that put all kinds of work in him are not touching him. There must be something they know that we don't know. And I don't think it's any huge conspiracy. I think it's just that he wasn't as highly rated on the inside of the NFL as he was on the outside.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it played out on draft weekend. It was, you no matter where you look, you can find the evidence to what you just said, whether it's the Giants trading up to take Jackson Dart in the first round, the Browns taking Dylan Gabriel in the third round, teams continuing to pass on him over and over again until the Browns finally came in and traded up to get him in the fifth round. Now, it doesn't mean that the NFL is right necessarily. They've certainly gotten guys wrong before. Russell Wilson was a third round pick. Tom Brady, the most famous of them all, was a sixth round pick. The NFL certainly gets these things wrong sometimes. And, I think it's a leap to say Shedeur is going to be Tom Brady, but it doesn't mean Shedeur Sanders can't be a good quarterback and can't be a starter in the NFL. But this was just one of those instances where there was a disconnect between, like you were saying, what people were seeing on the outside and how the NFL viewed it on the inside. And we got one of those weekends where the NFL, all these teams had to show their cards. And what they showed us is we don't really believe in this guy as a starting quarterback in the NFL. And maybe the Browns will benefit from that. Maybe a year from now, we'll be sitting here saying, man, the NFL messed up big time. And the Browns were beneficiaries of that. What a bold move by Andrew Berry. But I think we're still a long ways from that.
Right. And I do think that it goes both ways. NFL teams can be wrong in over evaluating a quarterback and undervaluing a quarterback. So there are plenty of examples. The NFL is littered with examples of failed first round quarterbacks. It's hard to get it right. It's really hard to get it right. And then there are plenty of examples of quarterbacks who have come from later rounds and have done pretty well in this league. Third round, fourth round, some even like you mentioned, in the 6th round, Brock Purdy as Mr. Irrelevant. Who would have ever thought? I mean, he just signed a blockbuster contract. So it's very, very tough to make that leap, to make that projection into the NFL and understand who is truly going to make it and who is not. But the things that we have seen so far from Shedeur, and again, he's working with the 4th team. We're keeping it in perspective. I wrote a whole column about this morning, and we'll talk about that in a minute, about how Kenny and Dylan are doing. But the thing with Shedeur is when you watch Shedeur, you can see the reasons why people had him ranked highly. And those reasons include he's got a really nice arm. He's got some really nice arm talent. He's got good accuracy, good touch on the ball. He puts it where it needs to be, and he puts it in a way that the receiver can catch the ball, and they are catching the heck out of it. So he does a really nice job with those things, and he really seems to be coming along in terms of being able to call it in the huddle, which they have to do that up here, and he didn't really have to do that much at Colorado. So he's learning all of that, and he's doing a great job with all of it. So he can prove everyone wrong that passed on him in this draft, but he still has his work cut out for him.
Yeah, and again, too, you just kind of go with what you're seeing at practice, and maybe it'll be different this week, especially when we get to watch 3 practices. And by the way, this just goes back to, I've seen people are arguing over those OTA stats again. They're like 2 out of 6 practices. That's what those stats are based on. First of all, there's been corrections made to those stats. I know some people think there's some shady dealings going on with Dylan Gabriel having an interception taken away, and they saw Joe Flacco throw an interception from a Browns highlight, but it's not on these stats that are getting floated out there. Just don't pay attention to those right now. They just aren't accurate. They aren't an accurate reflection of what we're seeing. But Shedeur has looked comfortable. Like you said, he has thrown a nice ball, but also we have to go with what we're seeing, and that's the fact that he's the one guy that, to this point, when we've been there, has not taken first team reps.
No, he hasn't. And that brings me to a little bit of the explanation of some of the things that we were seeing on Wednesday. So Shedeur isn't having, as the 4th team quarterback, who doesn't generally get as many reps as the other guys, as the 4th team quarterback, he's not having as much heaped on his plate as Kenny and Dylan are. Kenny and Dylan were sort of identified as the 2 guys who might have the best chance at starting on opening day, based in part on how the Browns felt about them enough to go out and acquire them where they did. Trading for Kenny Pickett at the start of the league year, drafting Dylan in the 3rd round. We know that Joe was acquired a month into free agency, and that Shedeur came in the 5th round after the Browns passed on him 6 times. So they had more faith in Kenny and Dylan heading into this process. Everyone can flip the script. We know that. But those 2 guys are having more put on their plate, and they are sort of taking the brunt of the installation. So when the Browns need to try a new concept, Kenny is working on that new concept, and Dylan is working on that new concept. So those 2 guys are trying some different things, and the most difficult things that the Browns can throw at them right now. And Joe's not maybe getting as many of those kinds of things because Joe doesn't have anything to prove or learn right now. He's seen it all. He's done it all. And whatever they give him, even if he is the starter on opening day, he's going to be able to handle it. It's these other 2 guys where they need to potentially get them up to speed to be able to start on opening day and handle the early part of the schedule if they're going to win the job. And Shedeur is in a little bit of a different category. He's not getting all of those really, really difficult concepts thrown at him right now to see what's going to work and what's not, the way Kenny and Dylan are. He is working sometimes on a field over there by himself to 100% get up to speed in this system and learning how to operate with a huddle and relay the tricky calls to his teammates in the huddle. And even Tommy Rees said doing that is way harder than you think if you haven't done it before. So he's coming just from a different place. And so I think they're working really hard with him to get him up to the point where he can do all of that and then take on more and more stuff. And he's getting comfortable. It's slowing down for him a little bit, but he's just in a little bit of a different category as the fourth team quarterback. And people might not want to hear that, but that's how it is right now. He hasn't taken any snaps with the first team. Everybody else has taken snaps with the first team. Yes, we did see him take some 11 on 11s, and that's important. He needs to do that. And maybe he's earned some more of that kind of work in this mini camp. But they're just bringing him along at a little bit of a different pace because of what is expected of him.
And some of that stuff is just universal across the board with these college quarterbacks. Like you
Right.
get to the NFL, there's a lot of guys that get to the NFL, they've never even huddled. Like going back to, they've never
Right.
even been in a huddle. These play
Right.
calls are so long. And a guy like Jackson Dart, I bet he's going through the exact same thing because the way they
Yes.
did it at Ole Miss. Like I saw a clip of him with John Gruden, and Gruden was saying, like, so, let's hear your snap count. And Jackson Dart clapped. They didn't have us. He just clapped. So,
Yeah.
and I thought I thought his head was going to explode. But like,
Right.
that's the stuff that is, I think a lot of that is universal for some of these guys coming in from the college ranks, where these offenses are so simple and so they really try to simplify things for these guys. They get to the NFL. It can be, it's like going from, I don't know, you're going to graduate level here, but maybe you didn't even finish your bachelor's degree necessarily with what you had to learn in college. So it can be a leap for a lot of guys. Now, we'll file this next question from Carloso in Plymouth, Massachusetts, under the category of this would be a great problem for the Browns to have. Hey, Mary Kay, in balancing playoff contention with learning what the Browns have in Gabriel and Sanders prior to next year's draft when they have 2 first-round picks, what would and should they do in the hypothetical that Flacco or Pickett is playing well and has led them to a 5-3 record at the bye week? And I'll just say, I think everybody in that Browns building would sign up for maybe not having an answer on these rookie quarterbacks halfway through the season, but being 5-3.
Absolutely 100%. Because there's one thing that we have learned about this football team is they're going to try to win every game. That's the culture of this Cleveland Browns regime. They are not packing it in. They're not tanking to get the number 1 pick. They're not going to do any of that. That is not how they're going to operate. They're going to go out there and they're going to try to win every single football game. So if they're 5-3, they are going to play the quarterback that gives them the best chance to win. It's what you have to do. There are no guarantees at the top of the draft. There are no guarantees that your quarterback, that you're going to draft the right one. Even you just have to go out there and establish the culture of winning, and that's the only way that you can do it. And we hear Kevin Stefanski talk about that all the time. So I 100% think that the Cleveland Browns will continue on with whoever gives them the best chance to win. I think the only way they would turn it over to the rookies is if they are completely out of it at some point and they have an opportunity to see what those guys look like. Now, having said that, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. Who knows? I mean, what if something crazy occurs and one of them ends up starting in the first half of the season? I'm not feeling that. I'm not seeing that. I do think that they're probably going to end up going with one of the veterans. But the truth is, we don't 100% really know yet how that's going to go. But I do think that that the Browns will try to. That was my husband walking by. I always try to tell him, please don't come in the front door during
Cameo.
work hours. Little cameo appearance from Bill Merman. I mean, what can you do? So he just said, I'm worse than a little kid. So thank you, Bill. We finally got the cats out of the videos for the most part. And now we have the husband.
It's always something. Just always something.
But not, see, Dan, you've got it going on over there. I mean, like,
That's because
it's always
I'm just down in my basement with a wall behind me. I have like the worst background ever, so
You're in the man cave.
I
Yeah,
guess.
see, I need a better situation. I keep saying, I'm going to get a home office made for me, but who's got time to do that? We haven't even had really a day off
No,
yet since last summer. So
no.
we're just
I'll
going
tell
to
you,
have
if somebody wants to
husbands
go
and
build
cats.
Mary Kay a home office,
Yes.
subscribe to Football Insider and send us a text and let us know.
Anyways, sorry about the random guy walking behind me there. But anyways, so I digress. What was I saying, Dan? What were we talking about even? Now I
I
forget.
think you were talking about, hold on. You were talking about the quarterbacks playing early, the young quarterbacks playing early, and how
Oh,
you didn't see it.
yes. I just don't see it. I really think that with the grueling early part of the schedule, that they're going to end up having to go with Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco early on, and then just let the chips fall where they may. I even saw something, I think it was today or yesterday, where now there's no way Arch Manning is going to come out next year. And, you just can't predict what is going to be happening in that draft. So you just have to go out and try to win. And you have to try to win, not just for all these other reasons, but a big reason is because you have a lot of Pro Bowl players on this football team and a lot of veterans on this football team that signed up to win football games, not to help you figure out who your quarterback of the future is going to be. So they have to be true to those guys.
So that brings us to this question, kind of the opposite of that sentiment. This comes from the 740 area code. Hey, Mary Kay, do you think there's a gentleman's agreement with the Haslams that Kevin and Andrew will keep their jobs regardless of how the season goes? I feel like Kevin has never had a normal year to really show what he can do with the team firing on all cylinders. And this one may be another roller coaster, because the reality is, you look at the schedule, you look at the quarterback situation, all of that. There's a world where they might not have a very good record. I'm not going to predict them to have a very good record, but I think I was talking about this at the golf outing with some people. They could win, and this is super easy to say in June, but they could win 5 or 6 games, and I think there could be positives to where you'd say, I think there's something here. Like, let's say the running backs look really good, and let's say the defense kind of bounces back a little bit. And I think there can be positives out of a bad record. I guess, again, easy to say in June, a lot harder to say in around Thanksgiving. But I don't know. Do you think Kevin and Andrew would be safe from a bad season?
At the owners' meetings in March, Jimmy kind of alluded to that to a degree, where he basically said that they probably do have a little bit of a hall pass this year based on the fact that they probably don't have or they might not have their long term quarterback answer this year. That is why they made the trade that they did, in hopes that in a strong quarterback class next year, they will be poised to potentially find their quarterback of the future. And so many guys have said, players on this very football team and other people have said, they're a quarterback away from being a pretty darn good football team. Maybe not a Super Bowl contender yet. They need to add several more pieces to get to that point, probably. But if they're a quarterback away, then maybe you do have to wait and see if you can get that quarterback next year that sets you on a course towards consistent winning over the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. They might not have that guy right now unless someone probably exceeds expectations in a pretty profound way. And maybe it's Shedeur, maybe it's Dylan, maybe it's Kenny. But right now, they don't know if they have their guy. And if they don't have their guy, then I think it's a little bit difficult to hold the GM and the coach's feet to the fire until you have him.
And I think that's where it's so interesting that the Haslams came out and took that bullet over the Deshaun Watson trade, like they did at the owners' meetings, because that's sort of what's over top of all of this is, right? Like, whatever happens this year, they're digging out from the Deshaun Watson trade. And I just thought it was interesting that Dee and Jimmy both decided at the owners' meetings, hey, you know what? That was on us. They kind of took that weight off of Andrew and Kevin. I know we did a pod about that where we sort of disagreed a little bit with it being entirely the Haslam's doing, but I thought it was interesting. I think in light of those comments and kind of this discussion, you can kind of see why they might say, we're going to take the bullet for Deshaun. If this takes a season to kind of dig out of, you guys have a little cover, and we're going to give that to you.
Yes, and I think they wanted to preemptively remove Kevin and Andrew from any kind of hot seat so it doesn't turn into the hot seat season. I think Jimmy wanted to establish, hey, this is a work in progress. No, we're not in full rebuild mode, but it's pretty evident to everybody looking at this that we are not sure yet if we have our quarterback. And you can't win without one. And therefore, we are not going to be talking every single week about whether or not Jimmy Haslam is going to blow this thing up. I think he kind of laid it out there that these guys are going to have a little bit of time, and he is going to be patient with them and give them an opportunity to see what they can do when they finally have a quarterback that they feel really, really good about.
Okay, there we go. A Hey Mary Kay edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Those questions from our Football Insider subscribers, cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page for that. We're on Instagram, Orange and Brown Talk, on Twitter, Orange Brown Talk, and of course, our YouTube, Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. We'll have a lot of clips, stand-ups, all sorts of stuff going up over the next 3 days from mandatory minicamp. So get subscribed again. That's Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. Mary Kay, I'll talk to you later.
Sounds great.